Yeah. Hi, welcome. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Is everyone able to hear me okay before we go too far? Okay, great. First, we're just have an announcement. It's going to be made in Spanish. We do have language interpretation services available if anyone needs them.
Buenas noches, tenemos servicios de interpretación si alguien necesita traducción al español.
And just for the people who are watching online, the language services are just for people here in person. So first off, thank you all for coming. Welcome to the public kickoff meeting for the Midtown Thriving Project. My name is Kate Stryker. I am a consultant with Hudson Valley Pattern for Progress. So as I just mentioned, we do have language interpretation services this evening. Our two interpreters are Jenny McCormick and Eumeris Renelt. And the agenda for the evening is first, we're going to have a welcome from Mayor Noble. Then we're going to be introduced to the project team and advisory committee for this project. We're going to hear about the New York State Department of State Brownfield Opportunity Area Program, which this project is funded through. We will hear about the pre-nomination study, which is relevant to this project. It was completed in 2019. We're going to talk about the planning process that we're going to be undergoing in this project. We'll open it up for Q&As, and then after the sort of formal presentation, we actually have a station to get some community input. So if there's anything beyond what comes up in the Q&A that you'd like to suggest or offer, that would be the time to do that. So before I begin, I'm going to hand it over to Mayor Noble.
Thanks, Kate. So super excited to be able to be with all of you, both in person and online. We have really tried here in the city of Kingston to bring the community together when we do planning work. Our plans should be built from the people up, right? And when we think about brownfields, we think about areas of communities that for many, many years have been not taken care of. People used the land and then moved on and left in its wake sometimes problems that we can, as a community, help build upon and help improve and help create more of usable spaces that create that vibrancy and that sense of place and the sense of belonging that we want in all of our neighborhoods in Kingston. And so when we have the opportunity through these grant funds to be able to bring Pattern for Progress, who we've worked with for many years, and all of our partners in the community together to be able to build a plan that reflects what the community wants, what the community's needs are, and how we can create a better use of some of the abandoned and vacant spaces in the heart of our city. It makes me excited, and I hope that it makes all of you excited too, because our community has a great opportunity at this moment to harness all of you to be able to work on maps and to work on what we can vision. This is a blank slate, right? We all know that we have a very special community. We all know that we have a very special city, but we also know that there's some things that we would all love to see. And this isn't a plan and a vision for what would we like to see. And that will help guide all of our development going forward in this community. As folks know, we have a brand new zoning code that helps provide that foundation of what we can build. We have a comprehensive plan. We have an open space plan. We have a bicycle and pedestrian master plan. We have an arts and cultural affairs plan. But this plan in particular is really going to be able to help pull out the specific sites that we all drive by every day, that we walk by, and we always say, I wonder what's the deal with that site? Why is that still just an abandoned building? Why is that an overgrown vacant lot? What's wrong with that site? And this process is going to help us uncover some of those answers and really help us say, okay, but what would you like to do next once we have figured out a path forward? And so thank you for coming today. Thank you for being a part of this effort. And this is, again, just the beginning. This is the kickoff of what will be an extensive and engaging process. And I want to just thank my City Hall team and all of our city staff who are working to move this project forward. And again, all of our partners and all of you for being here and being committed to Kingston and helping to move our city forward. And so with that, I think I'm going to turn it back over to you, Kate. So, all right, thank you.
All right, so the project team, and I'm going to tell you a lot about this project, but before we kind of get into that, from the city of Kingston, we have Bartek Starodai, who's the Director of Housing Initiatives with the city of Kingston. Bartek, you want to raise your hand? From the Department of State, we have Susan Landfried. She's with the Office of Planning, Development, and Community Infrastructure. Susan's here with us this evening. She's managing the grant, which is funding this project. And then we are the consultant team. We're with Hudson Valley Pattern for Progress. If you're not familiar with our organization, we're a nonprofit. We cover the Hudson Valley, which is 9 counties from Greene and Columbia all the way down to Westchester and Rockland. We're a regional educational planning, policy, and research organization. And from our team, we have Adam Bosch, the president and CEO. Robin DeGroat's not with us this evening. We have Elke Gottfried. She's executive director of the Center for Housing Solutions and a senior urban planner. Eric Pearson, he's the executive director of the Main Street Hudson Valley and also a senior planner. Yasmin Aziz is not here this evening, I don't believe. She's a policy research associate. She's going to be contributing to research specifically around the market conditions in the area. And I'm Kate Stryker. I'm the Director of Resilient Community Planning. I'm also a senior research planner. So as with many public projects, we have a steering committee for this project. The committee meets once every 2 months on average, and they're not a decision-making body at all. Some of the committee members are actually here this evening. I saw Manuel, if he wants to raise his hand, in the back. And is anyone else here? Oh, yes, hi. And there's Lisa Barnard-Kelly from the Midtown Arts District, and I think we're joined by Erica Brown online. So the committee is not, as I mentioned, it's not a decision-making group, but it's really put together to influence our sort of understanding of the community, to offer assistance and guidance through for our process through this project, and also to, in some cases, offer technical assistance. So, for example, we have Amanda Laval from the Ulster County office. She worked on a pre-nomination study and has a very good understanding of the contamination in the community. And so she's sort of available to offer assistance around that topic. So Mayor Noble sort of asked this question, but I'm going to ask it too. This image is a vacant site in Midtown. You may be familiar with it. And the question is really, I want to see hands here. Who has walked by a site before and asked yourself or thought to yourself, you know, I really wish that that site were a fill in the blank. Who's here? It's like experienced that. I mean, I certainly have in my own neighborhood, you know, where I live in Beacon, New York. And if there's an empty site, it's like, I know that, you know, maybe there's no park in that neighborhood. Maybe there's a need for housing. So this, in a nutshell, this project is really about thinking about those vacant sites and thinking about what the community needs and wants, and what those sites can be. But it's also, we don't want to forget that some of those sites actually may be used, actually. We may see them as empty sites, but they may be serving a function. So it's also important for us to understand that. And Mayor mentioned brownfield in his opening remarks, and I'm curious how many people in here are familiar with the concept of a brownfield? Okay, so a brownfield is basically, in its simplest definition, it's land that is known or suspected to have environmental contamination. And so what that means can depend on the site. The reason it's contaminated is usually because of the former use of that site. So often it was used for industrial purposes. Maybe it was a gas station or an auto body shop or a dry cleaner or some other use where there was contamination. And as you can imagine, these sites have a negative impact on communities, maybe foremost because they are an environmental hazard in the community. And there's community health risks that are related to that. But also because sometimes and oftentimes the land remains vacant or underutilized for potentially decades. Some of the sites in Midtown, that is the case. And that can contribute to feelings on unsafety. It can discourage investment. You know, people may not, it may be conscious or unconscious, but people may not want to be near those sites because they make them feel bad in some way. So New York State has a brownfield area program, which is a grant, which is what's funding this project. And the purpose of that funding is to provide assistance for the development of a community-based plan. And that plan is really going to allow the community to create a vision for the neighborhood, create development concepts for a selection of those sites. So it may not be for all the sites in the area. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. The plan itself is not going to remediate, but the plan will be used for the remediation and redevelopment of select brownfields and other vacant sites into productive uses that meet community needs. So again, just to reiterate, this process we're in now is not going to be the remediation of those sites. This process is really about thinking about that remediation and, the redevelopment of those sites. The plan can also be used to develop actions, policies, or investment recommendations for the neighborhood. So the plan is sort of two things. It's thinking about specific sites, but it's also thinking about the area, the BOA area, which we're going to talk about in a second. And I just used the acronym, which I was going to tell you about in a second. So this all results in what's known as a designated brownfield opportunity area. So BOA is the acronym. I'm going to be using it throughout this presentation. And if you follow this project, you're going to hear that acronym a lot. So BOA. So there's benefits to this process itself and then the designation of the area as a BOA. The planning process itself is an opportunity for community building. So many of you probably come out to public meetings regularly, but our intention really is to get as much community input and to bring people from the Midtown neighborhood and Kingston at large together to give, so that we understand what the needs are in this community. And that process creates community building because people are coming out and they're talking about their community together. They're getting to know people that maybe they didn't know before. And that can actually have lasting benefits beyond just this process or this project. Then the designation of the BOA area, the Brownfield Opportunity Area, it basically demonstrates to investors, to developers, that there is community support for certain development. The projects that align with that vision, which the community comes up with, and that can lead to expediency and reduced investment risk for people who want to do work in the BOA. There's tax credits to offset the cost of remediation and encourage redevelopment of brownfield properties. And these credits are for projects that are within this brownfield opportunity area. And I'm going to talk in a few minutes about what that area is that we're talking about. And then redevelopment can lead to the creation of new housing, job opportunities, and other community benefits. And again, I'm just going to say here, that is a short list of what could be a really long list. So it's up to the community to think about what needs to be on that list. What do we want to get out of this process? And then ultimately, this will lead to the cleanup of environmental contamination in the neighborhood and the reduction of public health risks. And there's more benefits. So projects that are within the BOA area also sort of get bumped up on the list for competitive state grants. So I don't know if you're familiar with opportunity zones in New York, but projects in opportunity zones kind of get, a lot of state subsidy is competitive, and projects that are in the BOA become more competitive. So that's an advantage. But there's also direct additional public investment for projects in the BOA. And I'm not going to go through the whole list, but it includes doing plans and studies on the environment, housing, infrastructure, renewable energy feasibility, as well as professional services related to developing in that area. And then there's also funding for phase 2 environmental site assessments. So when a site is suspected to be a brownfield, to have contamination, there's different phases of assessing what that contamination is. The first phase is where you look at the current and past uses of that site. So if that site was, for example, at one point a film processing lab, you would expect it to have certain chemicals associated with film processing. So then, and you sort of go through the records on the property, and this is our job, is to go through those records and sort of understand that a little bit. After you go through those records, you go into the phase 2, and you sort of have a sense of what you're looking for. And a phase 2 is where you're actually doing soil samples, you're looking at the water, you're bringing those into a lab, and you're actually testing for specific contaminants. And that can be really costly. So the state offers support for projects to do that phase 2 within the BOA. And again, this can be a barrier to redeveloping those sites. So that's sort of a huge benefit as well. So I have a couple case studies here of projects that have come out of BOA designations. There's 57 designated brownfield opportunity areas in New York State. In Oswego, there's a BOA called the Oswego Corridor. This is along their waterfront. The BOA area has about 40 to 50 vacant or underutilized or brownfield sites. It was designated in 2015, and here we're just looking at one of those sites and sort of what came after the BOA designation. So this is called Harborview Square. Up here on the right, you see this former industrial site was abandoned. They went through the New York State Brownfield Cleanup Program. They used tax credits because they were in the BOA, and they basically redeveloped the site you see on the upper right into what you see in the bottom picture, which included townhomes, affordable housing. 11 of those units were accessible for people with disabilities. And the buildings were all LEED certified, so they were energy efficient. They met energy efficiency and environmental standards. Another case study is in downtown Rome. So Rome at one point was a huge producer of copper, produced about 10% of the copper in the United States. And when that industry sort of fell away, it left a lot of contaminated sites. They went through the BOA process, designated the area as a brownfield opportunity area, and their community vision and their goals really laid the foundation for that part of Rome to receive a lot of funding from different sources. And so I don't know if you can see on the slides because they're a little small, but they got over $77 million into the area following the BOA. And the funding sources included money from National Grid, US EPA, Community Development Block Grant money, money from the city. They got money from the Department of Transportation to do a street improvement project in the BOA. They got $10.2 million from Homes and Community Renewal to do affordable housing development at this school, which is pictured here. That was one of the sites. And I don't think I mentioned it before, but I want to say, I keep talking about these sites, and in Kingston and in most BOAs, not all the sites are brownfields. So we have a list of sites, which I'm going to be talking about in a second, but some of them are just underutilized, or they're vacant, or they're tax delinquent. And there's reasons we're considering certain sites within this area. We'll talk more about that in a minute. So as I mentioned, in 2019, Ulster County did a pre-nomination study for the Midtown BOA. Midtown was one of 5 sites that the county looked at. They were really focusing on areas that had access to highways, water, sewer, and telecommunications. The other sites were in Ellenville, Kerhonkson, Saugerties, and then Midtown. And this project that we're currently really just kicking off is going to build on the work that was done there. They provided, we were going to be using that study as a preliminary analysis of the study area and the sites. They also gathered a lot of community input from focus groups. And pretty significantly, they came up with this boundary that you see on the map right here. So this is the area that they considered as they proposed would be the BOA boundary for Midtown. And what went into the decision making for this boundary was one, it included the Midtown Arts District. It includes the Kingston Green Line Street and Trails. It has some key manufacturing and rail transportation corridors. It has the largest and highest concentration of underutilized properties in Ulster County. It's one of the county's most economically distressed areas based on poverty, income, and home values. And it had a diverse and fragmented mix of land uses. And there's an extra end. They also, with the input from the community, they came up with what they called vision components. And they specifically, they looked at neighborhood quality of life, arts, culture, and business, and open space and trails. And I'm going to actually take the time to read these because there was a lot of thought that went into this. But I want to point out that the world's changed. This study was completed in 2019, and that was before the pandemic. I think we all know that the pandemic revealed certain challenges that were always there. It also raised new ones for Kingston, for the world at large, but even for Midtown. So this what's on this slide is, it's a starting point, and it's worth sort of keeping it in mind, but I think we want to build on what was said here. So neighborhood quality of life, a future for residential neighborhoods where strong housing revitalization programs promote homeownership, local ownership of multifamily properties, and neighborhood leadership groups are in place to help combat poor housing quality and distressed properties. And I would say the city and the neighborhood groups have actually made a lot of progress on this. I mean, the city has, since 2019, updated the zoning to allow for more housing. I know there's a lot of groups in Kingston doing work on this exact issue. Same with arts and culture. So in 2019, they wrote Midtown's economy grows around the arts, education, and business while supporting the area's traditional large footprint uses. I know that a lot's happened in the arts since then as well. And same with open space. So they wrote multimodal transportation opportunities. Let me move this so I can read it. That leverage old infrastructure to create a hub of greenway trails with accessible open space for recreation and neighborhood park access. So we have, this project is going to last about 18 months. And we've broken it into 3 phases. This is our kickoff meeting. We're sort of in the initial phase, which includes collecting data, beginning our community engagement. And this is really going to culminate in the development of a community vision and an analysis of the conditions in the neighborhood. We go into phase 2 around December of 2024, and that's where we're really zooming in and we're starting to look at specific sites. We're already looking at those sites, but we're really going to start looking at those sites with the community and thinking about development ideas for those sites. I'm just on pause because we're switching language interpreters. Okay. So in phase 2, we go into really looking at the specific sites, and looking at the feasibility of developing those sites, working with the community to come up with concepts for those sites. And then phase 1 and phase 2 really get compiled together into a draft plan, a draft BOA plan. We will present this to the public at that point. It's using all this input. We'll ask for feedback. We go back based on that feedback. We make revisions, and then we'll submit that to the state to officially designate the area as a brownfield opportunity area. So I'm going to go into more detail about this. So data collection, we're doing that now. We're looking at economic, demographic, and housing data. We're looking at land use, ownership patterns and zoning, transportation systems, infrastructure, current and future hazards, doing an inventory of buildings, There's not a lot of parks and open space in Midtown, but we'll do sort of an inventory of those as well and thinking about the relation to the larger city. There's also not a lot of natural resources or environmental features in Midtown, but how does Midtown, what happens in Midtown impact the natural resources beyond the area? We'll be conducting a market analysis for the neighborhood. And then again, we're looking at these brownfields and other abandoned and vacant sites, and also taking qualitative input from the community engagement. So the community engagement is this very multifaceted, in-depth plan we've put together, beginning with the steering committee, which I already mentioned. These public meetings, we have 5 public meetings slated for over the next 18 months. The next one's going to be on May 15th. I have a note about that at the end, so you can write it down. We also are going to be going and doing kitchen table meetings. The first one of those is on April 25th, and I have more information about that too. The kitchen table meetings are really, you guys are all here. This is wonderful, but not everybody's able to be here tonight, oftentimes because they're working, they didn't hear about it, any number of reasons. So the kitchen table is, these sort of events are us really going out into the community to meet the community where the community is. We also have visiting stations where we're going to be going to events that are just happening. We'll be there with a table. And then we have what we're calling the traveling roadshow, which are going to be longer sessions where we're really visioning with the community. And these will be, we're going to be providing a meal. We're going to ask people to show up for a few hours and really get creative. We're also going to be doing walking tours where we're walking around and visiting some of the sites. And the point of those is because these sites are in communities, they're in neighborhoods. It's important to understand what's next door. How do people access these sites? How do these sites feel? Any kinds of things that come up. And really, we want the community to come out for those to let us know what your thoughts are when you're walking through the neighborhood and looking at these sites. We're also going to be conducting a public survey, which we will be beginning soon. And we're going to be conducting interviews. So we have put together what we're calling Spiral. And this is our commitment that we're making as we undergo our community engagement. And it's a commitment towards stewardship. We're talking about brownfields. This is land which has historically not been well cared for. You know, I mean, I'm not accusing anyone in the past of anything malicious, but we're living with the results of what happened in the past. So really thinking about land in a new way and thinking about how to protect the land and the people from damaging processes. We commit to preservation, protecting existing community assets and beloved places. We want to know, what are you afraid of losing? What do you love? We don't want to destroy that. That's not the intention of this project. It's the opposite. It's to build upon what's great. We commit to inspiration, so encouraging creativity and imagination for an aspirational vision beyond planning as usual. We commit to representation, so actively seeking input from people who are traditionally underserved and we don't hear from necessarily, and ensuring accessibility and accommodations. We commit to agency, so honoring the community's power to make decisions and influence the process based on their own knowledge of need. We believe the community knows best, and we commit to learning. So moving beyond the process based in telling and informing, and one that is rooted in knowledge sharing and mutual learning, involving communities in implementing the engagement plan. So as I mentioned, this sort of product of the first phase is coming up with this community vision. So what is a community vision? It's a cohesive statement for the area with a list of specific goals to be achieved relative to community redevelopment and investment as shared and expressed by the community. You may know the city of Kingston actually already has a BOA for the Rondout area. And so this is the vision that was written and expressed in that BOA. The Kingston waterfront will be an environmentally sustainable, attractive, active, walkable, culturally vibrant district with strong linkages to the rest of the city and Kingston. shops, restaurants, recreational opportunities, museums, and events will attract visitors and residents 7 days per week all through the year. New development will be consistent with established character and will highlight the area's historic and natural resources. Trails, parks, marinas, and boat launches will maximize access to the waterways, creating high-quality recreational opportunities and optimizing meaningful, permanent public access to the waterfront. So, and then the plan includes goals that sort of support that vision and strategies to achieve those goals. This is taken from a BOA up in Albany in a neighborhood called Sheridan Hollow. Their vision statement: Sheridan Hollow will be a great place to live and work, a community where people want to stay. People of all ages, incomes, and culture will make the neighborhood their home, attracted by its variety of quality housing choices, access to jobs, dynamic and accessible public spaces, and the neighborhood's commitment to preservation and sustainability. Sheridan Hollow's engaged residents will live in and own their well-loved, healthy, and equitable neighborhood. And then their goals that sort of support that vision were promote housing affordability, create economic opportunity, strengthen community, and enhance resiliency. So then following that, there's all these strategies that sort of support that vision. And the sites themselves, what the community comes up with, these sort of development concepts for these sites really needs to reflect that vision. So if these projects are not in line with the vision, they're not going to be supported. So moving on. So I mentioned a few slides back that there was a pre-nomination study done in 2019. And they had the boundary, which is here shown in green. And so for those of you who are here live, afterwards, there's some printed maps up here if you want to take a closer look, because I realize it's pretty small on the screen. And through meetings with the committee and just sort of our thinking about this and the benefits that the BOA is eligible for. So those planning projects that we mentioned earlier, where you can do planning and feasibility studies around infrastructure or housing, et cetera, the things I mentioned before. We thought it might be wise to extend the boundary a little bit, but this is not set at this point. And sort of the things we were considering was the businesses along Broadway to Delaware Avenue. So I think I can actually turn my pointer on. Does this work? Oh. Okay, never mind. I thought I could point there. All right. So anyway, down here on the bottom right, sort of an extension of Broadway along here to include those businesses. The Hasbrook neighborhood, which is just above there. Along Fox Hill Avenue, the sites up here, some of which are industrial sites. The inclusion of the Pine Street neighborhood, including the gateway to the city from I-587, thinking about connectivity to Uptown, and then including the parcels across the street. And the argument, one of the arguments for that is that that ensures that the roads are actually themselves included within the BOA. So as I mentioned, we have a list of sites. The pre-nomination study had a list of sites. We've gone through that list and updated it. Their list was put together looking at known DEC and EPA sites, vacant sites, tax delinquent sites. And so we went through, we looked at their list. Some of them have been developed, they're functioning great, that we would not consider them underutilized. So we kind of checked those ones off. We found some new sites. And we also, I mean, Bartek and I worked on this together, sort of have a sense of some of these sites, they're currently being used as a parking lot, but maybe that's not the best use of the site. So we want to consider those in our list. So I've mentioned that part of this planning process is developing development concepts for specific sites. So what does this look like? What is community-led conceptual site planning? So first of all, we're going to narrow the list of sites down, and we're going to narrow it down based on input we get from the community about this site needs to be something else. You know, whatever the community sort of sees as really important and key in achieving that vision that's going to be set forth. Sites are also going to be evaluated based on certain characteristics, assets. Is there good transportation? How big is the site? What is the development potential under the zoning? What are the known environmental issues? Are there any? Are there none? What's the remediation? And remediation means cleanup. What is the cleanup, the remediation needed for that site? Site plans will incorporate strategies to meet community needs, such as increasing housing opportunities, if that's determined to be a need, enhancing retail, if that's determined to be a need, et cetera. The site plans will include implementation strategies, including feasibility, next steps to advance the projects. We don't want this plan to sit on a shelf. We want things to happen. So part of our process is thinking about how to make that happen, thinking about the funding that can be leveraged to move these sites forward, thinking about the partners, the relationships. We will also be obviously including the property owners themselves in these conversations. We're not going to work with property owners who aren't willing. We want to work with people who want to be part of this process. And so this slide, I realize, I don't think anyone can see it. Am I right? Okay. So this slide, I'll just explain what it is. The Sheridan Hall BOA that I mentioned a few slides back in Albany, their plan is really interesting in that it included not just redevelopment proposals for specific sites, but they also had a whole list of recommendations around mobility. So they had, within their BOA area, they identified places for pedestrian connections, traffic calming, multimodal improvements, complete streets improvements. They also had recommendations around how to improve the public realm. So that means like public parks or streets and sidewalks, including green infrastructure. But they also had a whole list of policies and programs. Again, and everything that's in this plan, it goes back to that vision that's set forward at the beginning. So these are all sort of support the community to achieve that vision and achieve those goals. So as I mentioned, we have a couple calendar or events which are already on the calendar. And I just want to give everyone a chance to know about them. On April 25th, we have that first kitchen table meeting at the Broadway Bubble. This is going to be a hands-on session for community members to share their input for this project. It'll be family friendly. We also have our next public meeting in this room, same time on May 15th. And in that presentation, we're going to go into a little bit more detail about the BOA process, but we're also going to be looking at some case studies and best practices, which I would see them as tools. So the community is really going to develop the vision and these goals. But if you have ideas about what other communities have done successfully, it might inspire the community to think of things that you might not otherwise. So we're going to be coming up with a whole list of best cases to present as just ideas. And as I mentioned, we do have a project website. If you haven't been there yet, a few years ago, the City of Kingston started the Engage Kingston website. It includes all projects going on in the city. Who here is familiar with it? Okay, so if you haven't been there, it's a great way to know about what's going on in your community. You can just go search Engage Kingston, and then once you're there, you can search Midtown Thriving, or if you prefer, the URL is here. So I'll just leave it up for a second if anyone wants it. Okay. All right, I'm going to move on. If you need it, just come talk to me afterwards. And now I'm going to open it up to questions, and I'm going to invite Bartek Elka, Eric, and Adam, if he wants to join us as well, and anyone else? And we're pausing now because, oh, I should announce to the people watching online. If you have any questions, I see that you've already done that. You can put them in the Q&A box, and so we will be addressing those. And I think people online can only hear us when we're talking in the mic, so.
All right, this is the part where the teacher in me goes, don't be bashful. We're here for you. Ask questions. It's good. It's healthy. Someone has to go first. That's the rule. Go ahead.
And so I'm gonna, just so everyone understands what's going on here, I'm gonna be walking around and handing the mic. You have to speak into the mic or the people online won't be able to hear you. So I saw.
Like we were sharing a mic in a bad band there for a minute.
Input seems to be the biggest factor in this project. We'll be making the decisions if not the steering committee, common council.
So the decisions about what exactly, just so I can.
Like what the plans will be with the funding, with the buildings too as well, the selection.
Okay, so the plan is going to put forward not anything that's set in stone. They're called development concepts. And then we will be sharing this plan with potential people who might be interested in developing those sites. But we won't be making decisions. The public will be giving us input all along the way. So I would say that the public's making the decisions about what's important and what's valuable.
If you don't mind, I think another part of the answer to this, just to be clear, is so the community helps us put together this plan, right? So as the mayor pointed out, you have all these plans that make these great layers of things that are allowed to happen in Kingston and that you want to entice to happen in Kingston, right? And this plan that we're putting together with all of you is another plan, another layer to that. What's different or important about this layer that helps the others? Well, you have this new zoning plan that really unlocks the potential to do a lot of different things in Kingston and in Midtown specifically. What this plan will do is it'll put into place, as Kate pointed out, these tax credits that will entice or allow investors or developers to do what you want on these parcels that might otherwise be very difficult to develop because of underlying contamination from decades ago, or other things like that. So we're not saying develop this here, develop that there, develop this here. What we're doing is, along with your zoning and the input from all of you, putting together a plan so that those credits can be put into place, which will allow and entice developers to do things that they might not otherwise be able to do because the financing or the risk or the environmental situation might not, allow them to do it, functionally speaking, right? Yep.
I have loads of questions, but just a follow-up to that statement right there, in terms of getting developers in to be interested in working on projects that the community brings up. If they're big-time developers, they tend not to be excited about projects that are exclusive to certain community members. They want things that are more outreaching to what would be more of a new demographic moving into the area. So how do you guarantee that, say you do reach out to the community and you get requests for, say, affordable storefronts, affordable, I don't even know what affordable means anymore for housing. That does not exist here. It's not realistic. But how do you get interest from a developer into something that doesn't look to them as something that is that important?
Yeah, I'm gonna try to tackle this one, the ultimate question of our current economy. But thank you for asking it. Oh, could I repeat the question? Well, I believe actually it's a good exercise. I'm going to try to repeat the question. You'll let me know if it's accurate. The question is, generally speaking, developers are interested in projects that ensure a certain amount of profit. And how do we entice developers to do what the community wants, which would obviously include affordability, accessibility, development without displacement, right? These are all values that we value as planners. There's only so much we can do in today's economy, and we're going to be honest about that. We're not making false promises to anyone. And certainly I've heard Mayor Noble say similar things about, the market does what the market does. What can we do in order to ensure that our neighbors can stay where they are, can afford to live here? Midtown is a beautifully diverse community. We've had the gift of being invited into many of the local businesses already. What I find really special about this program in general, and perhaps Susan can speak to this as well, what I find unique about this is it offers an opportunity for the community to kind of insert itself into the natural, it's obviously not very natural, but the natural progression of the market, right? So it allows the community to say, if you developer want to access these tax credits to clean up this site, you're going to have to do what we're asking for. And that's kind of the lever that we're pulling here. So our job as planners is to try to strike that balance between what is actually feasible development-wise and what the community needs and wants, right? Because if you ask for too much, then the developer may say, we're not going to do that. We're going to develop anyway, and we're going to pay for the remediation out of pocket and just, right? So, I mean, we'll be honest, it's a very delicate dance and a balancing act. And those are the conversations that over the next 12 to 18 months, we're going to be having with you and saying, all right, there are always trade-offs. What are you not willing to give up on? And what are you willing to kind of, be a little bit more flexible about? Does that answer your question? Yeah.
I just wanted to add one more note on that. The sites that you saw on the slide earlier, it's a very diverse group of property owners. In some cases, these are really contaminated sites that need a lot of investment. But in other cases, I mean, some of these individuals, they just haven't had any ideas and are just fine with the status quo. And so actually, by giving them some ideas, it reduces their uncertainty and actually gives them some incentive to move forward, because here they have a plan. Maybe it'll give them some ideas for how to redevelop the property. So, there's the tax credits, potentially the financial incentives, but there's also more to the vision that will be developed. Yeah.
At what stage do you identify who the property owners are and engage those individuals or parties to determine their level of interest in actually participating? And is there a number of property owners that have to say yes or are interested for this to even work?
We've actually already started to engage with the property owners, and almost all have expressed interest in this project and working with us.
And I'll just add to that, we have a list of sites, which is not the list of sites. So again, I said it sort of may change a little bit, but just to kind of get ahead, we have started reaching out to property owners already.
That was my question.
I think there was a part 2 of that question, though. Is there a minimum number of property owners? I actually am not sure how to answer that, but I wanted to make sure that someone did. Does anybody?
Nope, I'm getting a head shake from Susan, who manages our grant, that there is no minimum number of necessary willing property owners. All right.
Can you talk a bit about how how the disposal of the hazardous building contaminants is gonna be handled?
So that is an excellent question. I cannot talk at this, I'm not prepared today to talk about the remediation process. We're not engineers. It'll happen later. I mean, I don't know if someone else wants to.
So in my career, I've been involved in remediation projects of different kinds. The answer is there is no answer, because every site is different, right? For some sites, the contamination is limited just to the soils that are at the very top. Sometimes those are excavated, taken away to a licensed facility, and fresh soil is brought to replace it. Sometimes when it's deeper down in the bedrock, there are certain systems similar to like a system if you had radon in your basement that you would use that remediates it that way. So there's a lot of different remediation tactics for different types of contaminations based on the concentration, the depth, where it is, what it is, how long it's been there. So there's really no exact answer to that question. It's really site specific and contaminant specific. And as Kate mentioned during her presentation, some of these sites won't have any at all. They will just have this really long period of vacancy or abandonedness that qualifies them for this program.
I mean, I will just add to that, that there is some known contamination in the neighborhood. There's documents that are publicly available about that contamination, and there's already been some remediation of those sites in the neighborhood. And if you'd like, I can talk to you more about that afterwards, but we're actually going to be addressing this topic in our next public meeting on May 15th.
Thank you. I was describing the BOA process to a community member today, and she asked me, is a brownfield the same as a Superfund site? Can you explain?
So all brownfields are not Superfund sites, but all Superfund sites are brownfields. So Superfund is sort of a certain designation that occurs. There is one Superfund site in Midtown, but no, not all brownfields are Superfunds. And Superfund sites receive sort of special funding and assistance for cleanup.
Thank you. I'm curious, outside of private development, what opportunities there are for, say, the city of Kingston to step in and develop one of these sites. You mentioned specifically Midtown doesn't have a lot of green space. There was a glaring chunk of, one of the largest properties on that map. I'm curious,
So the city actually owns, I believe, one of the sites in Midtown, and there's potential that the city will acquire their sites, not making any promises because obviously there's a cost to that. So those sites, the city would have direct control over what happens to them. But it's potential, there's a potential that some of the sites may include, I mean, the larger sites could include, it's not unheard of to have private developers develop some sort of public-private space on their site. So it's possible to get some green space out of some of the sites.
I was just going to add to that, Blake, like as we're going through the gathering of public comments and public ideas, that's a totally reasonable one, right? Hey, this is along the bike path we just created. So like maybe that should be a special park along it. That's a totally reasonable idea that fits within the scope of things we're trying to learn from the community.
Hold on. One of the things I want to note that Kate mentioned earlier is like, this is not just about the sites. This is about, streetscape improvements, mobility improvements, safety improvements. So all of those things are still very important for us to understand in this. It's not just about the sites. That is one of the primary things, but we also want to know about neighborhood improvement overall.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this presentation. It's great to hear. I live in Uptown, and I'm sticking my neck out here. But in Uptown, empty buildings have been bought by private developers, and several of them been turned into hotels. This is not what the community needs. How are you going to prevent and guard against that kind of development when it seems like the laws and everything favor private development as opposed to community needs? And I'm unhappy to hear that we might be the victims of the market. But the market is not in favor of community building, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes back to the original point, which is that we can't promise everything, right? And so if someone wants to propose a hotel or a lodging use on a property where the zoning allows for that use, there's nothing, that we can do to prevent that. What this is about setting a vision for what that site could be and incentivizing the property owners to develop that property in such a way that meets the vision. And so if hotels are not it's not part of that vision, then it won't be in the plan, right? But there's nothing that we can do if it meets the zoning criteria.
Other questions?
My first question was, what what do you mean by a market analysis?
That's a great question. So our plan for our market analysis is going to evolve based on any community input we get, but the plan is really to look at existing wages in the community, existing industry in the community and the greater area, look at market for sales, for housing. I don't know if you're familiar with our organization, but we do a lot of data research around housing needs. So if one of the sites is suggested to be for housing, we can very competently and confidently sort of understand the need for housing and at different incomes. And the same for retail. It's sort of a similar data dive in what retail exists within the area and what there's a need for. And again, we will be using community input to inform that analysis. So if the community is telling us over and over and over, we need a grocery store, that's not going to guarantee market success of a grocery store moving in. But that does suggest that there's a need and that there would be support for that type of business.
Yeah, and to back up what Kate just said, there's essentially like 5 types of uses out there, right? Residential, commercial, retail, industrial, and parks, right? So you'll take a look at what's in the market of Midtown now, what's not, what that market could bear, what it couldn't, what the public says it has and wants more of, what it says it doesn't have and it would like to have, and all of that goes into this big soup of a market analysis. And that allows us to understand, the term is pencil out. What sort of uses would pencil out well in Midtown that meets the needs that everyone is going to articulate to us and meets the needs of the data as well. And we can use that to try to help guide this group and sort of the things that you might want to give preference to on these parcels and in the neighborhood.
I just want to address one question online, which was, does the BOA process, or at the end of the BOA designation, would there be opportunity for individual homeowners to receive grants for property improvements? Is that part of the BOA?
No, not that I'm aware of. That is not part of the process.
Right, not formally part of the process, but certainly, as a municipality, we could say, hey, we have this designated BOA. Let's start a program specific to the BOA for any potential need. One of those could be property repair.
Absolutely. So I think actually in the Sheridan Hollow example I showed, one of their policy recommendations that was included in their BOA was a homeownership maintenance program that the city decided to fund because that aligned with the vision.
Maybe I could have not interpreted correctly, but I guess I'm still kind of confused on who would be making the final decision. Is it the Pattern for Progress, the developers, or the community? Like who's making the decision at the end of the day?
Okay, so this is a broader question about what is a planner, I think, or what is a good planner. Not to claim that I am one, but so our job is to translate what the community tells us they need into the technical mumbo jumbo that can be adopted at governmental levels. And so as far as we're concerned, the decisions of what goes into this plan are made by you all and all of the people who come to our series of community meetings. We then synthesize what you tell us. We put it into a document. We share it with you. We say, is this what you meant by that? And if you tell us, actually, no, you totally misunderstood me here, then we will change that. And if you tell us, yeah, you got it right, then we will go ahead and submit that plan. But this is an iterative process. It's a collaboration between us. Kate shared our spiral framework. We put that together because all of us as planners, we have been in communities time after time and worked with other firms, for example, who may not feel the same commitment to ensuring that the decisions are made by you. So, I mean, I'm not trying to like toot our horns or anything, but we are committed to that process of a relationship rather than, checking off a box of community engagement and saying, look, we did it. I'm willing to, all of our email addresses, our cell phone numbers, like we're here. We want to have these conversations. If there are people who are not around the table, we want you to bring them. We want you to tell us where they are. So I hope that answers your question.
And I just want to add, I'm going to toot the horn for the state in this case, which is not what I normally do, but I actually think, what is it? I think that this planning grant is really unique in that it really does prioritize the community input and the community engagement. And that's really, I think, I mean, Susan can speak more to this, but that's really the motivation behind creating this is an understanding that oftentimes brownfields are in communities that have historically been disadvantaged. And let's right the wrong. Like this land has been contaminated. People have been living with this contamination. These sites are posing issues for our communities. And in order to actually make a meaningful change, like we need to hear what the community actually needs. And so we have a lot of resources to go towards community engagement, which is not always true in a planning project. In fact, it's never been true for me that I've had the level of resources that we have for this to really, really get out there. And that's our intention, as Elka said.
Thank you. So some sites have shown that revitalization efforts often drive up home prices, make neighborhoods more desirable, and then increase like gentrification in that area. So I'm wondering if there's a way that we're able to safeguard against these kinds of things.
So this is an issue that has already come up in our steering committee conversations. I think the first meeting we had, the work topic of displacement was like the thing that people really wanted to talk about because it's not just a fear, but it's also something people are witnessing. Their friends are having to leave the community because they're getting priced out. So hearing that in that first committee meeting, when I said next meeting, we're going to be presenting case studies. One of the things we're going to be looking at is what other communities have done to really combat displacement as an issue. And there are definitely some strategies that we think the community should consider. We're not going to prescribe or push anything. It's really up to the community. But again, if you don't know what the tools are, then you're not going to know what to ask for or what to sort of build into the vision. So for example, on our committee, we have Weston Minnesali. He's with the Taproots Community Land Trust. I don't know if you've heard of them. And that was intentional, like including him in the committee. We felt like that was somebody who needed to be part of the conversation. So that's an example, but there will be other things and tools that the community should consider. But again, we are working in a market and we don't want to overpromise. There's no way to
Yeah, I'd also just say, these are vacant sites, right? So think of them as opportunities to be a source of affordable housing or to be a anti-gentrification, right? Plant the anti-gentrification flag on those properties, right? Because they could be a source of opportunity. In the new zoning, there are also, if a developer wants to propose a certain number of housing units, right, a certain percentage of those have to be affordable, for instance. So there are also things built into the development process to ensure that with any development, there's a mix of unit types. So just keep that in mind as well.
I want to just chime in real quick to this one. In addition to housing, of course, just generally the notion of cooperative ownership and that collective action we're seeing more and more of it for this exact reason. You have an incredible place in this town called Tilda's Kitchen and your local currency. And I mean, that is unheard of. And so I think there are a lot of local resources. Kate also recently, Kate led an event that we did recently on cooperative ownership. And so we have also those resources and connections. And so if there is anyone in the community that wants to learn more about that, we are able to support efforts like that as well. And maybe even include elements of that in the plan if that's something that keeps coming up and that's something the community needs and wants, and that's something that maybe can be supported in future by additional, state funding or local funding, et cetera. I mean, these are all ideas that we can come up with together. I think, those questions are questions that we ask as planners all the time. How do we operate in this market and make sure that, we are writing our relationships with land and labor through these processes. So I hope that answers your question.
This hand up in the back.
Thank you. So I just wanted to be clear that, so the money goes to improve these properties that are owned by several property owners, one of which is the city of Kingston. And this plan that is brought to these property owners will, essentially, they are not compelled whatsoever to abide by this plan. It's up to the property owners. So I just wanted to clarify that point. But I have some other questions too, if I could ask. And I'm wondering if one of those, but if it's possible that if these property owners are benefiting from this grant, if the city, it just seems like there's some way in which
So-
the city
So,
could, oh,
so there's there's a little bit of a confusion here. There is no money. There's no money.
right.
So
No, not, but I mean, to make the site an actual usable site, if
to
it's.
make the site an actual usable site, they would qualify for tax credits in exchange for doing something that conforms with the plan. So there is no money that they get, just to be clear on that.
But so they have to, they are compelled to conform to the plan. They can't just do whatever they want.
Susan wants to chime in.
So as has been conveyed today, cleaning up a brownfield can be a very costly and challenging process. And so developers are often shy away from this. So there is a program called the Brownfield Cleanup Program that's run through a separate state agency. And so if you engage in cleaning up a brownfield and redeveloping that, you do qualify for tax credits because it is such a costly thing. By doing a development that is consistent with what is in this plan that we're talking about, you qualify for some additional tax credits because, and so that says we are going to be doing a development that is in accordance with what the community wants at this site.
I see.
So you do get an additional, there's an additional incentive to do what the community has said we want here.
Right. Okay, but yes, but ultimately they can decide to just go with the initial tax credits and not go with the additional incentive. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that is correct. And I think that goes to Bartek's point of like, if it is within the zoning ordinance and the zoning allows it, then they are able to do that.
So in the best case scenario, all the engagement will happen. All the community will tell to the property owners what to do, and we will do it. The remediation happen. The worst case scenario, everything happened, and the property owners decide not to do anything, right? So what could be the cause of not doing anything? Because in that case, what it could be happening in the near future. So what are some of the causes that could be health issues, obviously housing issues, and all of these other things, so we can be aware of all of those problems that can happen in the near future if we don't do anything?
Well, I mean, it's a tricky question because the contamination that we're aware of, as Kate mentioned, there's public documents on it, is sort of static. So in other words, like it's in the ground, but you don't get your water from there. You get your water from a lake that's really far away. It's in the soil. You're not growing anything there. So I mean, what I mean by static is it's there, but it's not mobilizing in a way that really kind of interacts with you. If someone mobilizes it in a way that does, then it can become a potential harm, which is why there's credits in place to help with the appropriate, based on sound science and sound engineering, cleanup of that stuff. So worst case scenario is you put together a plan, the landowners don't want to participate, and nothing happens, and you're exactly where you are today. But as Bartek pointed out, as Kate pointed out, there's already been indication from a good solid handful of landowners that not only would they potentially want to participate, but also they're excited to get ideas from the community so that they know what their participation, sort of what the shape and contours of it should be, right? What do you want? That way they can come perhaps with a proposal that's based on what you want, and then they know they're not in for a, for the typical planning board fight that so many developers get into because they might not be doing what comes from a broad community process like this, right? Hope that answers your question.
The other layer that I just want to point out is something that was already said a couple of times, but just to hit this home, the sites are very important, and so is the broader vision. The broader vision and designating a BOA makes a lot of other funding opportunities available to the community. So, you know, if that means, again, any sort of organizing or community-led development or anything really that, you know, I'm hearing the skepticism. I hear it. I'm meeting you there. Okay. But, you know, the sites aren't the only thing. Like this will eventually help you access more resources as a community to do what you want to do and see what you want to see.
So I'll give a quick example. There's a couple historic sites within the designated area. Again, to Elka's point, not on the parcels, forget the parcels, in the area, right? Those sites might have in the past, let's say, applied for some grants to improve those historic sites in some way, but maybe they didn't rank very high on the competitive list. Now, because they're in the BOA, they might get an extra 10 points on that ranking, and now they might get that grant that for years they've tried to get but couldn't get before. So even if nothing happens with the parcels, you're still making this portion of your city more competitive for the full spectrum of other stuff that the government offers to make your community better. Does that make sense?
Just another example of a very commonly used competitive state funding is low-income housing tax credits. And so being in a BOA sort of knocks you up on the list for competing for those. So if housing is determined to be a need in the community and the developers who own the properties aren't going to build the housing you need, at least there's sort of that tangential benefit.
And even in addition to the rental tax credits, there are now new homeownership opportunity. There's a affordable home ownership opportunity program that's fairly new with the state. So I mean, there are many opportunities that can be accessed with more ease through this product. So.
You're asking about short-term costs or just costs in general. Aside from the contamination or pollution, right? These are vacant sites that in some cases have been vacant for decades. And we are in the middle of a housing crisis. We have other community needs. Maybe that's open space, maybe that's retail. And so, you know, for me, every time I walk by a vacant site, there's an urgency, right? There's a public health component separate from the pollution about finding a better use for a site, especially a site in Midtown. So separate from the pollution, there's other costs that I think there's an urgent need to address those.
I had a question regarding your relationship with CSX. Obviously, it's a huge barrier to connectivity in Midtown as well as a safety issue. I see that you have some parcels identified in their ownership. Are they one of the owners that you've engaged with already? And what kind of plans do you have to engage with them in the future?
Yeah, so we have not engaged with CSX as part of this project. There is, however, another project that is ongoing, and that is to build a pedestrian bridge or a pedestrian tunnel. I'm not sure if you're aware about this, sort of from the metro on Greenkill Avenue to the YMCA. And so the city is formally engaging with CSX on that project. You mentioned it, it's difficult to work with them, but that is one engagement strategy right now that the city is doing, and that will be a huge improvement to connectivity when that project happens.
I wanted to know what reports, plans, and so on that you're already aware of or you're working with besides the form-based code, and I know there's many. So I'm just going to name, like, we have combined sewers that we need to disconnect. There's a solar mapping report coming out in the next 6 months. We have a tree inventory. There's a study about how to make Foxhall more walkable. Those kind of things that I assume you will already know about or will learn through this process.
All of them. All plans will be looked at. Every plan that has Midtown will be ingested. It will be considered. Don't you worry. We're not going to ignore any plans that you have already put together as part of your vision for your city.
Yeah.
And that's not a bumper sticker. That's the truth.
Yeah, we don't want to waste people's time
Yeah.
because people don't have time. It's a resource. And if people have shown up and talked about an issue, sure, people can show up and talk about it again, but it's also our job as the consultant to review what's been done. And that's actually, I mean, I didn't include it in the phase for, the phase process for this project, but that is certainly one of the early steps always is kind of to review what's happened. Fortunately, I didn't mention this really, but we have had a history of working with the city on several projects. So we're somewhat familiar with what's going on, but not entirely. And yeah, it's our job to do that.
I want to go ahead. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I have a question about what affordable housing is now in terms of with what the area AMI has become since so many people have moved in who make a ton of money in comparison to people who don't. And in terms of that, if people do ask for affordable housing, what does that mean in terms of, because it's probably not the definition people coming in who might think about or going to ask for that. What options are there if people aren't making anywhere near what is now the AMI? I think that's my question because I know the idea is a good idea, but how does that translate in reality? You want me to take
You want to go first? You want me to go? I've got Bartek, you go first.
Yeah, I mean so AMI is the area median income, and it has gone up quite a bit in the past couple of years. So you're absolutely right. The city's formal definition of affordable housing under the form-based code is 80% of the area median income for any given year. So that's our formal definition. However, I do know when I'm engaging with a developer, I am actively trying to get them to target lower AMIs, right? Because obviously just focusing on 80% does not cover the full spectrum of need. So oftentimes there are specific programs that target between 0 to 80% AMI. And so I think there's always an opportunity during a redevelopment project to figure out, okay, what resources can we bring to bear to serve a larger spectrum of need? Not every project is going to do that based on the financials of a particular project. But we do know, looking at the past, that when there's a greater mix of projects, some of those projects are going to target a deeper need.
So Elka here runs our Center for Housing Solutions. We are the region's housing nerds. Okay. So we know this pain that you're talking about, right? In just the past 6 years, the median price of a home in Ulster County has gone up 84%, right? Rent has gone up a heck of a lot. We know that you have to make, I think it's $8.09 more an hour for the average renter just to have affordable housing that's not more than 30% of your income. We know that the market generally pencils out that for that affordability, it needs to go down to 40 to 60% of AMI, depending on what county you're in. Bartek just talked about what the city requires, but guess what can help those developers cut deeper into affordability? Tax credits that come with a brownfield area, because that helps them build at a little less expensive cost because the tax credits are part of what's called, not to get technical, but the capital stack, right? This capital stack is the mix of borrowing and cash on hand and tax credits and historic tax credits and all the different financial instruments you use to pencil out how you're going to pay for this thing you're building. And the more of them you have, the deeper into that affordability you can get to. So this helps that eventually, or has the potential to help that eventually. Okay.
We're going to take one more question online, and any other questions we're going to take after because we actually need to end the meeting on time at 7:30. So we're just going to take one more question from online. And then if you have questions, we're sticking around. And I want to invite everyone, after we take this last question, to go to the input table we have over there. There's a place to leave comments, questions, and look at the BOA map and leave your thoughts about it. So the last question's from online.
Yeah, so this is from Liz. The question is, are the properties owned by the city able to be transformed into housing? And she continues, we are in a crisis and it's only going to get worse when developers get involved. So, one of the sites that is listed is a city-owned property. And, I can say that the city is trying, obviously, to deal with the ongoing housing crisis. And so absolutely housing is a priority in this case.
Go back to my next slide. All right, so as I said, we have a table here where we're asking for community input from people who are present. And I also want to just mention again that we have a website. If you came today in person, you left your email, hopefully we will keep you up to date on this project. If not, you can go to the website. All information about the project will be posted there. And you are also welcome to email me, Kate Stryker at patternforprogress.org, or Bartek from the city. Again, if anyone needed it, here's the URL. And this presentation will be posted on the website if you want to go back and look at anything in more detail. Please stay in touch, and thank you all very much for coming and spending your evening with us. If you're hungry, there's lots of food that needs to be eaten in the back. Okay. Have a good night.